Hey, Dave. Can you hear me
How you
okay, Dave?
doing?
Hey. Hi, everyone. This is
Man,
Jim Gast and DJ Myers. Hey, Dave. Oh, my bad.
morning, everyone.
A little echo on the background there. So we are two-thirds of No Law Firm Left Behind, and we are here today to help your law firm stay competitive. That's one thing we're trying to do. We're trying to keep your staff and your attorneys productive and efficient at the same time, and we're trying to help you get new clients calling, right? And I kind of think that goes hand in hand with making sure that you don't lose clients, right? Don't you think, Dave?
Absolutely. Best
So
clients are
that's
the
what
ones you already have.
Yeah, so that's what we're here to talk about today is actually how to keep your clients calling and how to not get them to hate you. Essentially, I mean that's what it really comes down to.
Yeah, pretty much.
So,
There's a real good way to, make your clients unhappy, and we're going to talk about that today.
whew, yeah. So as I said in a lot of emails, a lot of the posts that you might have seen, the problem that's going on right now is that most IT providers really just don't know what they don't know when it comes to cybersecurity and risk management. And I want to differentiate the two of those. And Dave, I'm going to give you a chance to jump in any second.
You got it.
Yeah, I want to differentiate the two. Cybersecurity and the technology that goes along with that is really only a third of the battle. Wouldn't you agree, Dave? It's
That's
just
right.
really a third of the battle. Yeah, you got to have the right antivirus. You got to have the right firewall. You've got to have, web filtering and so on and so forth, right? All these technologies need to be in place. The problem is Windows patching. Gosh, we can't forget that. And security patching of all the software you use. But the problem is that, as I said, it's only a third of the battle. Dave, you just want to kind of go and tell everybody what the other two-thirds are?
Yeah, so I always explain to people that pretty much if you look at any widely accepted and respected cybersecurity framework, you're going to see three legs of a tripod is how I like to explain it.
Well, let me ask you. Let me stop you. Explain a little bit for our audience what a cybersecurity framework is. I don't want them to miss out on that.
Okay, so we know cybersecurity as a concept. Okay, that's just understood. But then, a lot of people ask me, so real quick, so in case anyone doesn't know, I am a consultant in cybersecurity technology, but I am actually also a data privacy attorney. And so I spend a lot of time looking at what the various rules and requirements are that are imposed on my clients from a cybersecurity perspective. What are they supposed to be doing based on what a statute says or an industry regulation or things like that? So when I talk about a cybersecurity framework, it's pretty much any of the governing sets of rules that apply either in a particular country, a particular industry, or whatnot. So when you think of things like HIPAA, when you think of things like GDPR, when you think of things like, California Consumer Protection Act, any of these are like the established legal frameworks, but there's also a number of informal yet widely accepted frameworks. So you've got several frameworks from NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology. You've got the Center for Internet Security. You've got the ISO series of frameworks. So you've got all these different groups out there.
You might want to mention the data safe harbor, at least in Ohio, and how it encompasses this.
That's actually going to be a little bit of the background as to where I got into this, where I started to develop this approach that I use to helping people out, okay? The reason why this came really to the forefront was late in 2018, the state of Ohio passed what they called the Ohio Data Breach Safe Harbor provisions, okay?
Mouthful.
And so right now, different states are taking different approaches. Some are taking a stick, some are taking a carrot. So some states are taking the stick approach where if you don't do X, Y, and Z, you're going to be in big trouble. Ohio took a different approach. Ohio took an approach that said, if you do X, Y, and Z, we're going to offer you some affirmative defenses in tort law against claims against you in Ohio by people in Ohio or giving rise in Ohio courts. So when this passed, it, basically the statute says, hey, you need to have a written cybersecurity plan. It needs to substantially conform with a well-respected framework. And then it listed several of those frameworks out in the statute as to say, hey, this is what we consider a benchmark that you can hold yourself up against.
Now explain what that benchmark does. Explain kind of the inner workings of these compliances, these benchmarks.
So these compliance benchmarks, and this is kind of circling back to what I was just saying.
Yeah, this is the other two.
They always have sort of three different things that they're asking you to look into or to take care of. One, they want you to take care of the technical controls.
Yep.
These are the things that you were just talking about, Jim. Firewalls, antivirus, things like that.
Things we do every day.
Exactly. But then they also mention your physical controls. So that's talking about things like, locking doors, access to servers, access to data centers, HVAC systems, badging, visitor logs, things of that nature. Security systems, cameras, monitoring, alerting, all that, if somebody breaks into the building. That's your physical security. Think of like the whole ADT concept, okay?
Yeah.
Then we have the administrative controls. And that's the whole idea that's wonderful that we might have a whole bunch of gizmos and gadgets that are supposedly keeping us safe. We might have locks on all our windows, but what's our policy? What's our procedure?
What if somebody
Those
unlocks
are your
the window kind of thing?
Is, how are we actually managing risk here?
Mm-hmm.
What are our own governing documents? What are our own policies and procedures to make sure that we're keeping ourselves safe? And that's what's called the administrative controls. And it's really every established framework is going to make reference to all three of those. Okay, so what started my deep dive into this was the Ohio, data breach safe harbor, and the fact that it calls out these frameworks and these three, and all the frameworks listed there make reference to these three tiers. Well, at the time, I was already in technology law and I already understood data privacy law, but all of a sudden I had like this aha moment and said, and I was also at SpliceNet, which we're a managed service provider. And we saw a lot of security stuff. Okay. We saw a lot of security tools. But all of a sudden, as I'm going through and I'm bringing myself, up to speed on if we want to be substantially compliant as a legal client, we have to have a whole lot more than just what SpliceNet's offering. And so it made me take a step back and start looking at things from a much more comprehensive perspective.
Legal perspective, really.
Mm-hmm. Yep, because so from the legal perspective, it's about a risk management aspect, okay? I'm a tech guy. At heart, I'm a tech guy. I love tech. I love whiz bang. And I have been guilty in the past of saying, wow, we should do this just because it's really cool and it does cool stuff, okay? Without really taking the viewpoint of saying, all right, what's it really protecting us from? Is the risk that it's guarding against likely to happen or unlikely to happen? If it does happen, what's the potential exposure and what's not? A lot of times it was technology for technology's sake. Now, I've always been a believer, don't do technology for technology's sake, but you got to remember, when we're talking about security, everybody sits there and says, oh my gosh, more is better. Always. And it's not really true. I have been brought into too many situations where somebody has depleted their budget on one really cool, hardcore tool.
Oh, we got the most expensive firewall in the whole wide world.
Haven't even touched.
Yeah. You know what I call that? I say that I call that spending all your money on the front door deadbolt and not investing anything on the security system at all.
You got it.
That's what I call
it. You got the really cool feature, and that's awesome. But you're missing so many other things. You're missing all that security layering that is so critical.
So let me ask you this, Dave, and we got a couple questions that we talked about that I thought would kind of help guide us and help us answer some questions for people that are watching. So you're a lawyer, right?
Yes.
We've already established that. I think that's goes without saying. You've been doing this for a long time. You've really strong opinions. I mean, we just go at it sometimes with our opinions on whether IT guys should be making recommendations or not to their customers. Now, in our case, our customers are law firms. So should IT people be making recommendations on security policies for their clients? and or their law firms?
I think not.
Okay.
And I do
I
have
got to follow on after you say what you got to say.
Yeah, I do have very strong opinions about that. And yeah, you and I do sometimes, get heated about this somewhat. At SpliceNet, we have for years kind of said, hey, here's kind of a starting point. I think you always use the phrase like a soup starter kind of thing, and then say, but you got to make it your own. And it's kind of like acknowledging, hey, we're not policy experts. We're not legal experts at SpliceNet. Okay. So you shouldn't take anything we say as legal advice, but here's something. And hey, I know that we're not the only managed service provider or the only IT provider that's doing that same thing. And something's better than nothing.
Right.
But I want to kind of draw a parallel. We're all familiar with, the self-help legal services that are out there. I'm not going to mention any brand names or anything like that. But if you talk to a lot of attorneys, they will say, okay, it might be better than nothing to go and do an online fill in the blank form, but it's never going to have that same level of review and that same level of care that, having an actual person who focuses on this sitting down and working with you on it. So many times, a lot of these boilerplate policies that an IT company will provide to the customer, they'll just say, hey, here's our policy. And then you go in, you start looking at it, you realize that you just adopted a policy that says you're doing all this stuff. And you're really doing like maybe 8% of it, right?
Yeah.
And so awesome. In a way, they've sort of made things worse for themselves when they do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it's like, I understand the positive intent when an IT provider does this, but I hate when they do it.
So how should it be done?
So here's sort of my thought. I want to kind of draw a parallel to the healthcare field. Okay. We have a GP, right? We have our general practitioner. We go to that GP and that GP says, hey, I'm going to help you in the everyday world put together a long-term, I'm responsible for your overall care across the board on all these different areas. But I acknowledge that I'm not a heart specialist or a pulmonary specialist or anything like that. And so I'm going to make sure that we get you in the right hands of the right people. If you're having an issue with your heart, I'm going to get you with a heart specialist. Okay? We're going to get that referral in place. But I'm still going to be involved in the process. That heart specialist is going to come back to me, and I'm going to make sure I know what's going on with you. I see the MSP sort of as the GP of the current IT field.
You know what? I'd argue that actually, Dave.
Okay.
I would say that probably turn it around for a second. And the person like yourself who's actually doing the risk consulting is kind of like the GP, and SpliceNet or some other IT provider or somebody that does managed backup or managed firewall, that they're using are the specialists, right?
So let's create two sort of scenarios.
We could do it either way, I guess.
Yeah, well, and really there's even a third option, and this depends on the size of the customer.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But really at the end of the day, the business owner themselves, at the customer, really is ultimately responsible for this. They're the end customer. Let's talk about how things work in reality today. Okay, because what you just said is sort of an ideal scenario in my mind. If everybody could afford to have an attorney on retainer for this all the time, that'd be great. But let's face it, attorneys can be wildly expensive, and having someone on retainer like this might be cost prohibitive,
right,
for a lot of folks. Okay,
I mean, we're talking about small businesses. By the way, we should probably frame this. This is small business.
Yeah,
right?
I'm not talking about corporate. I'm not talking about
corporate. Has a completely different structure.
That we know can be applied to corporate, but that's just not the world that we work in.
But that doesn't mean that we can't play the corporate game in the small business.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah,
exactly. So if you're in a corporate environment, it just is understood that if a big decision is going to be made, you're going to have the executive committee involved, you're going to have legal involved, you're going to have IT involved, you're going to have public relations involved, you're going to have human relations involved. It's just understood. How do we emulate that on a smaller scale? when we don't have all those different things. At a small business, you might have 2 or 3 people that wear all those hats.
Yeah.
And then everything else is outsourced, right?
One IT guy and then the managing partner in our customer.
If that, how many of our customers, we are the IT staff?
Right.
We're it when it comes to making those technology decisions. But those technology decisions go beyond more than security. And that's why I like to refer to the MSP as the GP.
Okay.
When it comes to technology, because we're putting in security solutions, but we're also putting in productivity solutions. We're also putting in convenience solutions. We're also fixing the printer when it doesn't work. So there's a whole slew of things that an MSP is going to deal with. And, I want to take just a quick aside and talk about what are the different players here. So I've mentioned legal, and we know what lawyers are. And I've mentioned MSPs, who I'd like to liken to the general practitioner, where they are responsible for the day-to-day health of the technology of a company.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But then we've got certain subspecialties within technology. So we've got a whole other group of people out there that's considered what's called an MSSP, a managed security services provider.
I was going to come to that. I want to explain it a little bit.
So let's talk about what an MSP is not.
Ha!
Okay, an MSP, like our company, is not a security specialist group built from the ground up to be very, very deep and very, very narrow in a certain area. So you've got companies out there that are specifically built to say, all we do is security work, but we're providing a soup to nuts solution that includes the front end deployments, the ongoing maintenance, and here's the big thing, we're going to follow up on everything. We are on top of all the stuff that happens. So what happens a lot is you'll have an MSP come in, like us, and we contract with our customers. And we say, hey, we're gonna give you good patching, we're gonna give you good antivirus, we're gonna give you a good firewall, and we're gonna put our best practices into place as to what the industry standard says what we should be doing for each of these security products, right? That's great. Then what happens? Now we start getting all this noise. Now we start getting all these alerts. Now we start getting all this information back. And what happens is you hit information overload. So we have to almost cherry pick what's out there on top of all the other GP things that we're doing, right? So we're still dealing with phone calls about printers being down and this application's giving me this error, et cetera, et cetera. Now, it doesn't mean that we haven't done exactly what we said we were going to do, because we've put technologies in place that improve the protection of the environment. But you made the reference earlier about all the money on the front door and none of the money on the monitoring. Okay? The fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter what technology us as an MSP puts in place. You could spend $100,000 to put in all the great whiz-bang stuff. And if somebody wants in, they're still going to get there.
Yeah.
If somebody is determined to break into your environment, just like if somebody's determined to break into your house, they will get in.
But doesn't it kind of come, hopefully before it gets to that point, doesn't someone like yourself, don't they take a holistic top-down view of the environment and say, okay, IT company did X, Y, and Z, okay, but they didn't do A, B, and C, and then this is outside of technology necessarily. Maybe this is a procedure or a security or a piece of documentation that needs to be put in place so that we can start to manage the risk before it becomes a technology problem. You see, isn't it obviously we know we do some kind of assessment that
Absolutely.
has a great big picture and has a bunch of questions. Now, talk about the piece of software that you wrote. I think that just really clarifies what.
Okay, so let me start by pointing out, and I know a lot of the people that are watching us, probably most, if not all, are involved in the legal field. Now, some might have formal legal training, some might not. Some might be other types of legal professionals that didn't go through law school. But one of the very first things that we all learned in our first year of law school as attorneys is this concept called the hand formula. All right. And I'm not going to bore everybody with the legal theory, but the whole point is that there isn't a reality that not all risks can be avoided.
See, I knew you learned something in law school.
I learned a couple things, okay? I just forgot about 99.7% of them. The idea is that not all risk can be avoided. And not only that, under the law, there's no expectation that every last risk has to be avoided.
Yeah.
That's, when people talk about strict liability, those are those exceptions to the rule. Those are those things where if the bad thing happens, you're responsible, period, end of story. For like everything else, there's this sliding scale saying, given what that risk was, what was the chance it was going to happen? What was the impact if it does happen? How much are you expected to mitigate against that risk? Okay. And so what happens is when you talk about risk management, it is much bigger than just saying, can we prevent this? Dirty truth, if someone wants in, they're going to get in. But even assuming we can stop them, how much is it going to cost to prevent this one risk versus this other risk? Okay, and what are our options for dealing with the potential exposure? And that's where the risk assessment piece comes into place. You have to accept the fact, especially in the SMB market space, budgets don't allow us to prevent every risk. It is impossible to do. So we have to look at it. We got to say, okay, first of all, what is the chances that this is going to happen? And if it happens, what's the damage it's going to cause? At that point, you have to make, I always say, you got three choices that you can make. One, you can either say, hey, as a business, we accept this risk. We know it could happen. It would be too expensive to mitigate it. But we think the odds of it happening are so low that we're willing to accept the fact that if it happens, we're going to get hit with those damages. That's a business owner decision, whether or not they're comfortable making that risk. But it is an option. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got mitigation of risk. And that is, yeah, this risk is likely and it's bad and it won't cost too much to fix. So we'd be stupid not to patch it. Anyone that looks and says, we really don't need antivirus, that would be truly idiotic. Okay.
We've seen it.
No, we have. Or saying, I'm just going to use the free stuff because I don't want to spend $10 a year per person or whatever.
Or we've actually went so far as to hear, don't tell me because I don't want to know about it. If I know about it, I'll have to.
Then I got to do something about it. Exactly. And you can't do that. So then in the middle, you've got the option of risk shifting. And that's just like we do every day with our auto insurance. You've got cyber liability insurance. And that's really just a risk shifting. It's saying, hey, I understand this could happen. I know I can't completely prevent it. I'm going to take reasonable steps to prevent it, but it could still happen. So in the event that it still happens, I'm going to fall back on that outlier with my insurance. So every single risk you look at, you have to determine, am I going to mitigate it? Am I going to shift it? Or am I going to accept it? That's risk assessment. That's risk management. That's where your IT provider has a voice, but should not be making that decision. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, because you could I think the important thing here is that, again, the technology is technology. If you don't take care of some technology, you're negligent. I mean, you're literally negligent. And you're going to be censured. Your grievances are going to be filed. You're going to be sued. Insurance companies are going to sue you. The judges are not going to be nice anymore. They're not being nice to law firms anymore. So if you're negligent, that's just that. And that's the technology, the basic technology aspect of it. Mm-hmm. But I like to think of it like this, Dave. We talk about MDRs, we talk about risk management, right? Mm-hmm. Things like that. And although those are technologies, those are people monitoring those technologies. What if the window gets open and somebody forgets to close the window, right? That's a technology that can warn you about that. But shouldn't you have a policy and a procedure in place? Hey, if you're going to open that window, you have to shut that window. Isn't that part of what comes from an assessment after the assessment, the risk management aspect?
So pretty much one of the givens of any cybersecurity plan is that it needs to be written down. I'm going to go back to the Ohio Data Breach Safe Harbor.
I got a plan. I call my IT guy, right?
It is specifically stated in the law. If you want this safety, you have to have a written plan. It has to be written down. And it just makes good sense, but you'd be surprised how many people I go in and they go, oh yeah, well, we know this, that, and the other thing. And it might be like just one or two people that know that. And that's it. But nobody has anything written down anywhere.
No. And try proving something not written down in court, let alone something written down that you were following your practices.
Or even, yeah, exactly. Or you don't have it written down, or you have something written down that you downloaded off the internet. Or that your well-intentioned IT guy provided you, and you said, "Hey, it's our policy."
That's what we call do-it-yourself wills, right? That's what our attorneys would call do-it-yourself wills.
Exactly.
Man.
And it's a very bad idea.
Yeah.
So what I did is I went and I took and I created this. What I did is I looked at this data breach safe harbor, and it referenced NIST and the CIS-CSC, the critical security controls from the Center for Internet Security, and they. Those were two of the frameworks that were referenced in the statute. So I took those two and I sort of melded them together. Okay. And then I added in, because I feel both of those groups really, while they had a lot of awesome stuff, by the time I melded those two together and kind of picked, and grabbed, CSC does better in this area, but NIST is more comprehensive on this one. Neither one really had a ton of great stuff on the physical control. So I went ahead and just added a whole bunch of my own physical control stuff with the help of Joe Macaluso. We got a good colleague there, and he does a lot of physical security work. We bring him in a lot of times, and I know what he's always recommending. So I'm able to go kind of ahead of the game and say, do you have the stuff that I know Joe's going to recommend?
Yeah.
So I took all that stuff and I kind of put it all together into a pretty hefty assessment. I mean, it covers 17 different subject areas and has, I think at this point, 253 individual questions. Each question potentially asking, do you have an administrative control? Do you have a technical control? Do you have a physical control? Is the control automated? And do you actually report and review on it?
Right. That's a big
A lot of times you'll put a technology in place, you won't do anything to look at it.
Right.
So that's the kind of assessment that I think people should be doing. They should be going through and saying, across all these different areas, every last one of these questions could have an administrative, a technical, and a physical aspect to them. Where do we stand on them?
Yeah.
And so when all said and done, there's over 1,200 data points that get collected through this assessment. And then it goes through and it says, all right, if this is one of those things where really all you need is a policy, here's a list of all the things that just need policies. Well, guess what you can do at that point? You engage your attorney. You get the policies. You don't get them from your IT company. You get it from someone that does this.
Yeah, and a lot of IT companies are using outsourced policies, but they're blanket policies. They're not.
They're blanket. And like I said, the thing that scares me the most when I see these blanket policies, look, I'm not bashing on MSPs. I'm a part owner of one. What scares me is when companies adopt policies that they don't understand and that they're not actually doing, can be worse than not having the policy in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
If you say we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and then you don't do it, that could reflect yourself on you.
You just basically essentially made yourself negligent again.
Exactly. You basically said, hey, we just ignored our own policies.
Right.
And so that's what I think, is so concerning there, is that a lot of IT guys are not able to talk about what the liability risk is, whether or not they're actually compliant with a particular regime or a framework.
Mm-hmm,
okay. Mm-hmm. Now, you can, as an IT guy, you can look at things that are being provided by other groups. Like let's take Microsoft, for example. We do a lot of work with Microsoft, right? And Microsoft has a huge legal team that does a ton of work on compliance. And Microsoft has put out so many tools that says, based on our legal team's review of GDPR, we're going to say your Microsoft 365 deployment is GDPR compliant to this extent. That's totally different than just your IT guy saying, here's some policies. Does that make sense, the difference there?
Well, yeah. Also, probably a difference on something like that, Dave, is that things change. They don't stay the same. Everything changes. And so, what you may say today we're GDPR compliant You might not be next week, depending on some change in the regulation, some change in technology, some change in a policy. This whole thing today is really to help people open their eyes to how IT guys can't do the whole thing.
They can't. Right? No, but they're a critical component to the process.
Oh,
okay? So let's talk about who you have to have involved in this.
Yeah, please.
You have to have certain groups involved. First of all, you have to have some ownership, in an executive committee presence here. You cannot, as the business owner,
got to be buying.
You cannot just abdicate responsibility and say, hey, you're responsible for all my security stuff now. No, it's still your responsibility. It's your business. It's your customers. You're the owner of the data. If something happens, it is ultimately coming back on you.
And you know what? The ABAs actually went so far to change model rules, and every state pretty much has adopted them to say.
Yeah, I mean, and in other industries, it's explicitly laid out. Okay, yeah. But anyone watching this, you need to understand that I don't care who you hire, what service you subscribe to. It's on you at the end of the day. It is your responsibility.
Mm-hmm. It's your business.
You have to be involved. You have to have these discussions with people because you have certain decisions that you're going to need to make.
Right.
All right. Then you have to have your IT guy or your managed service provider.
They got to be the hands and feet, the people to go do the work.
They're the ones that are going to typically be implementing a huge chunk of the standard security technologies. Pretty much every IT company is going to have a recommended antivirus, a recommended firewall, a recommended, web filtering service, a recommended email, scanning service. All these different, we talked about earlier, there's baseline security that you just have to have. Your MSP is going to be doing that. That's your GP. That's just like saying, I'm going to get your flu shot every year, and I'm going to get my blood pressure checked every year, and I'm going to get blood work done every year, okay? The stuff that you just have to get done. But then if you want to take that next step and you say, hey, we realize that the risk is high enough, okay, and let's go ahead and just throw the consultant in there. Maybe it's an attorney, maybe it's a non-attorney, but somebody that's in cybersecurity risk consulting, okay? Have that person involved, and then they're going to help you make this decision. Here's the risk if this happens, here's your exposure, et cetera, and here's what the typical mitigation costs are. Here's what the typical remediation costs are. So if something goes wrong, this is what it's going to cost you after the fact. And then you as the business owner say, all right, I think I need more. I think I need a specialist at this point. And you say, you know what? It's not enough just to have the deadbolt on the front door, which is your antivirus, which is your firewalls, which is all that stuff. I need to have that full-on ADT system. I need to have that managed security service provider, your managed detection and response, managed risk, threat management.
And that's where you
bring in your specialty groups. Mm-hmm. We work with one, the one that we typically work with is called Arctic Wolf. And it has real live people that sit there and watch all this noise that comes through 24 hours a day.
They're not necessarily alerts even. They're just logs of everything.
All kinds of logs. And they correlate it all, okay? And when something reaches a certain threshold, they go, hey, guys, you might have someone in the building.
This combination of alerts says, hey, somebody logged in from Japan and they elevated their admin credentials to the highest level and they changed a bunch of file permissions at the same time. That type of behavior isn't caught.
Those things taken together should be a great big red flag for you.
It's not. Maybe they made it past the firewall because they snuck past it. But man, maybe they made it past the antivirus because they snuck past it. Maybe they made it past, and hacked Windows and changed the registry entry and nobody caught that because those aren't things that are necessarily alerted. But the combination of those things where they're logged, those things using artificial intelligence are a great big red flag. So, right. Yeah. But, so talk about the managed risk element of Arctic Wolf and what they can do.
So one of the other things that I always tell people when I come in as an outside advisor, and I actually make the same recommendation as SpliceNet, but, it causes people's eyebrows to go up sometimes. I tell them, hey, we really need to get someone in here to, run a check on your security. And they'll look at me like I got three heads.
And it's not a pen test either necessarily.
What are you doing? And it's like, we're putting in what we understand to be best practice stuff. But
Yep.
we also understand that we could have, 35 different services in place. And guess what? There's still going to be holes that we
Yeah.
didn't think of. And there's going to be new holes tomorrow. And there's going to be new holes a month from now.
Always.
And so we actually recommend having something outside of us that's providing an additional check on things. So one of the things that we do is, and I'm asked this a lot of times in audits too. Okay, so if I've got a customer and they're being audited by one of their customers, they'll be like, "Show me your risk. Show me your risk scan. Show me your threat scans." Okay. Sometimes they'll want a penetration test. Most of the time, they just want to see that there's a vulnerability scan taking place.
But a pen test is not a risk analysis. I want to make sure that everyone knows that is.
Pen test is oftentimes not really necessary. It's really expensive. It's a huge undertaking. And most of the time, this is just my experience. Your mileage may vary. I'm an attorney. I'm not your attorney. When a vendor asks for a penetration test, 9 times out of 10, they really are okay with a vulnerability scan. Okay. Now you might have that one that says, no, we have to do a real red team, blue team exercise. Okay, fine. But most of the time they just want to know somebody other than the IT company themselves is vouching for what is open in the environment so that we have a list of things that we can still do better. And so one of the things that Arctic Wolf does for us as well is they have a managed risk threat analysis thing. And it basically goes through and does consistent scanning. And they control it. Okay. We have if they say, hey, this is now a risk, we go, we don't agree. Who cares? They said it's a risk. So it's that third party check. And then we use that and we mitigate those risks. And then they come back with new risks and then we mitigate those risks. And, it goes on and on. But you really want to have that third party, that person other than your IT group that's providing that. So now we've got owners, we've got consultants, we've got attorneys, we've got your IT guys that do the everyday stuff, we've got the guys that are specifically like the ADT managed response group, and then you've got the third party check and balance.
By the way, I want to say one thing real quick. ADT, we just use this as an example, as an analogy, right? I mean, their solution is not in my.
I do it because people understand it.
Yeah. I just want to make sure they do have a managed risk thing, but it's really just a monitored firewall, which is really what we're talking about.
No, you want to find something that's specific to the cybersecurity industry, and ADT is awesome for your house. We have other things we work with.
They're awesome for security, but not for physical security.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, at the end of the day, you've got all these people involved, and we're going to kind of bring it full circle. You shouldn't have, while they are a key part of the team, the managed service provider or IT company is not driving the ship when it comes to cybersecurity. They're just one player.
Yeah,
Okay.
I got it.
That's really kind of where we all started from.
In a perfect world, who does?
Say again?
In a perfect world, who drives that ship?
In a perfect world, it's all really driven by risk. Okay, because we don't even bother bringing in IT until we've determined we want to actually mitigate a certain risk.
Mm-hmm.
IT does not have the risk management view that the senior level executives and we'll say legal, in my opinion, legal should be driving the ship along with senior executives. Now, there are plenty of people out there that, focus on cybersecurity risk assessment. And there's all kinds of tools and whatnot. Mine is just one of them.
Right.
My tool is just one thing that you can go through and say, here's where you're good. Here's where you need more. Here's how you get there.
So yours is more your role, the application you put together, the part that you can play is almost like a navigator, really.
That's exactly right. But at the end of the day, the business owner makes the decision on what risk they're willing to accept.
Right.
What they're willing to spend.
So when you're finding you got 1,200 data points and you're saying, you know what, we gotta find a solution for these 700 of them. It's the business owner's decision. You're going to make your recommendations, but it's the business owner's decision to decide we're going to do this one, this one, this one, this one.
Exactly. But here's the thing. So at least, there are other ones out there. Like I said, with my assessment, what it does is after you've filled out the 1,200 data points, it comes back and it categorizes things. Okay, so it goes through and it has, and I'll just read out the different things here. It breaks it out into, here's your current risks where you can mitigate it by just adopting a policy. Okay,
yeah.
And you would just engage with an attorney, and so typically what they'll do is I'll write the policies for them at that point. Okay.
Well, I'll tell you what, Dave. Vinny's giving us the because he couldn't make it today, and we miss him here. But Vinny's giving us the guys. You're 10 minutes over, so let's sum it up for us, Dave.
Long story short, it takes a village. Okay. And you need to remember that there's more than just technology involved in cybersecurity.
A lot.
You have to always remember you've got the technical, the physical, and the administrative, and you need to have parties involved that understand each of those areas, and you got to work as a team. That's the only way that you're going to, really have a holistic view of managing cybersecurity risk.
And if they're going to engage with you, Dave, with the entry point, engaging with somebody like yourself, and again, we're trying to plug you, but at the same time, we're trying to plug a hole for customers, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not
engaged with you. The first step would be, hey, we want to do a risk assessment.
That's always, well, the first thing you do is you always start with kind of like a quick assessment.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are missing some incredibly basic things that we could normally knock out in a 4-hour phone call. Hey, do you have this, and this? No? Okay, you need to get this, and this before we even bother with getting into the in-depth stuff. Okay? Right. So there's almost like a, first cut assessment. Mm-hmm. And then after that, if you decide to go further down the road, then we can get into the more comprehensive process.
So I'll tell you what, I'm going to clean it up here for sake of time. Thanks for joining. If you're interested in any of this, you can reach out to me at jim@splice.net, or I'll put you in contact with Dave. It's so much easier that way, if you don't mind, Dave.
No, that's
certainly, I've got the link for No Law Firm Left Behind group on LinkedIn right here. Go join that group. And I'm sorry it's an ugly number rather than some pretty name, but that's just what LinkedIn lets us do, so we have no choice in the matter. But go join the group and put a message in the group, or private message either one of us on LinkedIn. So really, Dave, I think this is very informative. I think you've shown, again, what we set out to do was there's only technology, only 1/3. There is a number of players, and the IT provider, MSP, is not the driving force in the matter, where most people think that they are. And I think also that we've established that, you need to do a quick risk assessment, if not a full risk assessment. So thanks a lot, Dave. Great job. I really appreciate it. Everyone, me and Dave, we'd like to say bye. The old waving out. All right. Take care.
Thank you all. Bye.